All of the directions.
Mahalo. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I'm Leah. I work at Pohana Onavahine. We are Hawaii's Native Hawaiian Domestic Violence Resource Center. That's how we're like labeled, but a lot of our work extends beyond just like gender-based violence. We do a lot of work with the missing and murdered, crisis in Hawaii specifically, and we just like work a lot of the things that we do are trying to connect Kanaka back to like their indigenous values and culture in order to end gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and the missing murder crisis and things in that nature. But because we have such a small group, I was wondering if you would all feel comfortable kind of introducing yourself so we could have this more as like a dialogue, a conversation, rather than just me presenting to you, because that feels very uncomfortable and unnatural to me. So, do you feel comfortable starting?
Sure. My name's Jody Noe, and thank you for your presentation yesterday. It was wonderful. And I live here in Connecticut, and South Carolina is where my tribe is from, the South Carolina Cherokees.
I'm Julie. Hello. I'm from Rhode Island. That's all I got.
Wonderful. Thank God.
I'm Chinese.
I'm Azrael.
I represent.
I'm Mahia. I am from Maui, but I'm in school at Yale. I'm supposed to be. Oh, welcome. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for you too. But my car is not here. Get up.
Oh my God.
Hello, my name is Kahala from Mahu.
Well, he's not living in Connecticut.
We're just doing introductions. Okay, great. If you feel comfortable sharing your introduction, we're just, because we're so small, I figured we could have more of a conversation.
Sure, my name is Nicole. I'm a law professor.
Perfect. Awesome. Wow, wonderful. Thank you all for coming.
I'll let you I'm going to take it off.
Yeah, I'm Leah, as I said. I actually grew up, I was born and raised in Alaska. I'm not Native Hawaiian. I'm actually Mexicana, so my mom is from Mexico, but I moved to Hawaii to go to law school. And, you know, having been born and raised in Alaska, very close ties to Alaska Native folks and very close ties to Kanaka. There's like a very like close relationship between Alaska and Hawaii. And so I felt called to go to Hawaii for law school, very grateful to be in this work. And so just as a disclaimer, this presentation is more geared towards like frameworks to when we're looking at missing and murdered redress. So like whether that be legislation or different things that have been passed to kind of remediate the crisis or hopefully end the crisis overall. This presentation is geared more towards Indigenous frameworks to analyze and look at what is being proposed and if it is in alignment with Kanaka values and restorative justice. So it is a bit of legalese. I'm happy to like go through it. And if it doesn't make sense, let me know. We can also just go over some like statistics in Hawaii specifically at the end, kind of what's going on in 2022. There was a report that was published specifically about Hawaii and the missing murder crisis there. And so that's some interesting information that I'm happy to go over after we finish this presentation. Also, if you have questions at any time, because we're so small, just like go ahead and let me know. Feel free to interrupt me. I definitely like, the presentation style is very like formalized, Western, like not my jam. So whatever we feel comfortable with, I'm happy to roll with it and just like feel free to shout out a question or like let me know as we're going through. So the way that it's structured is that I'm going to go over a framework that is used to analyze redress and when we're proposing legislation or policy to, or like when, we're proposing legislation to heal a crisis, and how that looks and how it's specifically tailored for Kanaka Maoli, so Native Hawaiians, and it's rooted in those Indigenous values. And then we're going to go over the missing and murder crisis in Hawaii, and then talk about the Violence Against Women Act and what that is, how missing and murder fits into that, and then trying to put it all together. So looking at specifically the ways that missing and murdered for Native Hawaiians has been addressed in VAWA, and if that's in alignment with these 4 Indigenous values under the legal framework. So, let's see. The 4 Indigenous values for contextual legal analysis, it was developed by Professor Sproat at the University of Hawaii, William S. Richardson School of Law. That's where I went. And it is between her and Mahina. They're the 2 that really kopua, like put forward this framework. And then Mahina articulated it in kind of a way that's easier to digest. And I think that it's easier to look at when we're specifically looking at different redress initiatives and how to like analyze them using these 4 Indigenous values. And so the 4 values consist of mo'omeheu, aina, maliola, and ea. And so all of these mean different things. These are all in Alelo. And so mo'omeheu is cultural integrity. And so when we're looking at a redress initiative, really the root of this value is we're asking, does the action or decision, so what is being proposed, does it appropriately support and restore cultural integrity as a partial remedy for past harms or perpetuate conditions that continue to undermine cultural survival? And so really all 4 of these values are grounded in principles, human rights, Indigenous human rights principles, and so they call back to different aspects of Indigenous culture that I think are widely shared among Native communities, right? So we're really grounding in the cultural integrity and asking, is this going to support our culture, right? Are we going to feel affirmed in this? Is this going to look at what has happened in the past, contextualize it, address it, acknowledge it, and are we going to uplift our culture moving forward with this proposed solution? And so that's the first value. And the second is aina. And so aina is, it's often like referred to as like the land and natural resources. And that's how people frequently think of it. But it means that which feeds. And so it's so much more, right? So like Indigenous people have often like this spiritual relationship to the land. It's not just I'm going to go and I'm going to exploit the land for what it is, and I'm going to take these resources off of it. It's a reciprocal relationship. And so we're not just, exploiting, and we're not having just a taking of these things, whether it be water or growing things, like we're stewards in many ways. And so when we're taking that into context of these redress initiatives, we're looking at does the action or decision perpetuate the subjugation of ancestral lands, resources, and rights, or attempts to redress historical injustices in a significant way? And so when we look to the history of Native people, right, we see that they have historically, colonization has historically happened and taken away the lands. And it has, Native people have been historically dispossessed of their lands and their resources and not been able to have the relationship that should exist and that has existed since time immemorial. And so we're taking this value and adding it to our tool belt, right, and adding it to the kit of when we're looking at this initiative that's being proposed. Does it give back? Does it value the things that should be valued? And then our third value is Maliola, so social determinants of health and well-being, right? And so, yes.
I noticed there was taking pictures of your spot. Will you share them after?
Yeah, if you would like them to be shared, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. I'm so honored you to have. So Maliola social determinants of health and well-being. And so, right, when we think about health and well-being, it's not in this like one like isolated silo, right? Where it's intersectional, and health and well-being doesn't just extend like I'm eating bad food and so then that makes me unhealthy, right? It's who are we having relationships with? Are they meaningful? Are we able to get out on the land? Are we able to engage with our culture? Are we able to really feel all of these things that we need to feel and like be able to be our whole selves and holistically heal ourselves, right? And so here we're looking at, does the action or decision improve social determinants of health or well-being or perpetuate the status quo, right? So we're asking if it's like, are we being able to address all of the things that have happened, bring all of our cultural values, bring like our relationship to the land, bring them all into this conversation. And is this what's being proposed? Is it going to heal in a holistic manner? Or are we just looking at one thing and does it address like, you know, if we're only like addressing this one specific area, or are we looking like at everything in a whole manner and how we uplift our health and well-being as Indigenous people? And our final value is EA. And so EA is self-governance, right? And so I'm not sure if folks attended the last few days of the panel, but the other panel that spoke about Native Hawaiian issues talked about the history of Hawaii, right? And the overthrow and the illegal occupation of the lands. And so self-governance in a Kanaka sense is so important, right? It is being able to like govern yourself and your people and have the agency over decisions is so important. And that extends, right? We can say like, oh, you know, it's important in the Kanaka sense, but it's also across all Native populations, right? The ability for self-governance and self-determination is so imperative when we're looking at redress initiatives. Like, are we able to decide things ourselves, or are we having, you know, this, someone else is putting these decisions on us? Are we being forced to comply with this, or are we able to fully engage and bring our whole selves and our decision making? Are we able to be our own decision makers in this? So we're asking, does the action or decision perpetuate historical conditions imposed by colonizers or attempting to redress the loss of self-governance? Does anybody know who this beautiful woman is on the right?
Your queen.
Yeah. Which one? Do you know which one specifically? I'm looking at you folks over here.
Well, the one that got kicked off her throne in 1959.
Yeah.
But I can't pronounce her name, I'm sorry.
Wow. I'm doing very like Socratic method. I'm sorry. It's the law school that's like ingrained in me to like pick on people.
I love Socratic teaching. Keep going.
Oh my gosh. Okay, perfect. So those wrap up our 4 values that we're going to look at. Right? And so as I've kind of talked about, none of these operate on their own. And they all operate in conjunction. They're intersectional, and they're 4 realms that come together and really coalesce to this discussion about self-determination. And so what we're doing is we're taking we're overlaying these 4 values on the proposed solution and seeing if they're really going to further self-determination, further agency over Native peoples, and really uplift that health and well-being and the 4 values. Any questions on the 4 values before we move on? Yes.
So on those 4 values, I understand that's your Indigenous values for making a legal legislative action, correct?
It's more when an action is being proposed or it's been pushed through already, you're taking this as a way to kind of like in an academic scholarly way analyze, like, is this actually going to help Kanaka? Is it going to help Native people? Is it uplifting these values that are so integral to the identity of Kanaka Maoli?
I think that's really brilliant and very important. So thank you for sharing that. I was writing down because this is the first time I've seen where we can evaluate legislature methodically, Indigenous.
Yeah, and I think that is that Professor Sprout is, she's brilliant in that way, and really is able to take and kind of like strategically utilize Western academia and like indigenize it, and put forward Indigenous values and like the people first rather than, the Western sense of education and the whole concept of like the ivory tower, right? Highly recommend looking into her articles. So then moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about the missing and murdered in Hawaii specifically. So this report came out in 2022. It was based out of the Missing and Murdered Native Hawaiian Women and Girls Task Force. If you scan the QR code on the left, it'll pull up the report specifically. Again, I'll share these slides, and so if you don't want to pull out your phone, that's totally fine. And so what happened is, in the legislature, House Concurrent Resolution 11 was passed, and out of that, this is where that task force was born. So we had the Commission on the Status of Women. It was the Commission on the Status of Women, Office of Hawaiian Affairs, various agencies, and the principal investigator of the report all came together to do these studies and put out this information because it was finally at a time where the missing and murdered in Hawaii was gaining traction. People were finally realizing it was an issue. It's been an issue for a long time. It's unfortunate it took so long for this report to come out, but it did, and it provides some like vital information about what's going on in Hawaii. The new report, so it's two parts. This first part came out in 2022. The second report comes out in 2025, so later this year. And it specifically, so the first report really looks at like data, where this is stemming from, and the second report focuses on survivor narratives, and so what survivors are experiencing, have experienced, and it's a shift, right? It's a very much a second edition of the first report, and I think it complements the first report very nicely and gives us a well-rounded look of what is going on in Hawaii. So in Hawaii, these are just some like broad statistics. So first, we're looking at the population in Hawaii, and 79% of folks that live in Hawaii are not Native Hawaiian. So the majority of people living there, not Native Hawaiian, 21% are, and so the population that is Native Hawaiian is disproportionately affected by these crises, right? And so when we break that down by age, 10.3% of the folks living in Hawaii are male, so all ages. 10.2% are Native Hawaiian females over the age of 18, and 0.49% are female under the age of 17 or younger, right? So just less than 0.5% are Native Hawaiian women under 17 girls, essentially, right? And I know that this information doesn't cover Mahu folks, so people who are, two-spirit folks, embody both male and female in their identity, and that's because we have a huge issue outside of the report specifically is about data disaggregation, right? We're not collecting data on Mahu, we're not collecting data on two-spirit folks, and that's a huge issue in and of itself.
Never do. It's not just Hawaii.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And so we're really working to try. One of our priorities, I'm on the policy and research team, and so one of our priorities in this upcoming session is really to try and push forward data disaggregation. And we're really trying to collect more info on Mahu and what they're experiencing, because we know through talking with Mahu, through talking with various folks, right, it's always this community that's like most affected by these crises. And so we need to get the data to correspond, to reflect that, because in this Western world that we live under, they only listen to data. And that's so unfortunate because we're not collecting it and we don't have it. And so then this issue and this crisis is just continuously expanding, and we can't fully address it and we can't heal it. So that's one of our initiatives, is trying to disaggregate the data, but I wanted to recognize that I know the crisis exists for Mahu folks, and it's so prominent, and that this graph doesn't represent them, and it is very frustrating. And so we have less than 0.5%, right, that are Native Hawaiian girls. But who is most affected by the crisis? Native Hawaiian girls. So, right, we're going back to that disproportionate issue. So the average profile of someone who's missing in Hawaii, 15 years old, female, Kanaka, from Oahu, right? In that less than 0.5%, this is who is always missing. And if we look at it, 2,000 kids go missing every year in Hawaii. That's
just from all the islands?
That's all the islands, yes. And so I want to say there's another statistic on it, and I believe that it says that it's either the people that are either most trafficked or go missing the most are from Waikiki. So that's on Oahu. Yeah, so over 166 cases a month, which is really hard to fathom. It's a staggering amount of children that go missing. It's not reported on. It's just a huge crisis that's not being addressed. And so continuing on the statistics, 25% of the missing girls in Hawaii are Kanaka. So 1 in 4, which is absolutely just heartbreaking, right? 43% of the sex trafficking cases are Kanaka Maoli girls. So I think that, like, for me, whenever I think about this, you can think about these statistics, right? And you're like, that's really unfortunate. But when you think about it in the fact that, like, who is the population in Hawaii, right? How many of these girls, like, how much do they make up out of all the islands? It's 0.495, whatever percent I said. But it's just, like, it's baffling. And, like, really trying to conceptualize this data is difficult. And I think that that's why the second report is also so important, because we're looking at the numbers right now, but then when you start to hear the stories, it really, you see how devastating this crisis is. So when we look at the driving factors of missing and murdered, we can look at, one way to really understand it is we look at assaults to Aina or assaults to Wahine. So assaults to the land or assaults to women. I think that assaults to Aina are
Assaults to the land or assaults
to women. Yeah. Are folks in the room familiar with, like, man camps and those things associated? Yeah. So something that's been discussed a lot in Hawaii is man camps in the sense of military occupation. And there is a huge issue where I believe that in a study, 38% of the military, or 38% of the people who were caught trying to solicit sex from a keiki, a child, were from the military. And so it is a huge issue. And you have this, like, military occupation that is happening in, stolen land. And it is just, it just proliferating the issue, right? It is ongoing. And so when we look at it as, like, other driving factors, right? We have the colonization. So we have colonization happening in the islands. And prior to colonization of Hawaii, there was no gender construct, right? People were free to express themselves however they felt. They were Mahu, they were Wahine, they were Kane. There was no, you have to be this, you have to dress this way, you have to act this way, you are a man, like, blah, blah, blah. It didn't happen. But as soon as colonization happened, there was this imposition of you are this gender, you are this gender, and the fluidity was really cut off, right? And so at the same time, you have these people coming in from the Western world, and they're introducing sexually transmitted infections. And so they are coming in and having sex or raping and kidnapping these wahine and these mahu and having sex, and it's leading to the genocide of these people. And at the same time, prior to colonization, there was no prostitution on the islands. It did not occur. And as soon as we have Westerners come in on the islands and take over the islands, we're seeing a rise of prostitution. In fact, one of the queens put a kapu, so like a ban on prostitution, trying to end it, and end, the taking of the women and like all of these like infections that are associated with prostitution. And there was so much like backlash and rioting and everything from these Westerners that the kapu had to be lifted. And the rationale behind it from the queen was that rather than seeing these wahine and mahu being taken to the ships that the colonizers were on and perhaps being kidnapped forever and being lost and murdered, it was safer to have prostitution and like to have them here on the islands rather than lose these wahine forever, which is really like it's a very sad concept to try and sit with. And so when we're looking at the islands, right, we think of just like what else is going on, and the sexualization of Kanaka wahine and sexualization of the islands. People often think of, like, in the military concept, it's like, oh, the islands need protection. We need to like save the islands and like protect it. It's part of the United States. Then we need to protect it. It's so vulnerable. She's like a vulnerable island. And then the sexualization of Kanaka wahine. Think about the luau's. Think about, you know, hula dancers and how they are marketed even to this day, and how this protocol that is so supposed to be so honored and shared with aloha is sexualized. And in that concept, we see the denial of body sovereignty and self-determination. You can think of body sovereignty as the sovereignty of someone's body, specifically like their human body, or you can think of it as the islands, right? We're having this denial of the sovereignty of the land, of the sovereignty of the wahine, and it is really causing the continuation, the essential creation and continuation of this crisis in Hawaii.
Are you saying that the military is like the man camps?
Yes, yes. There's
Always has been.
there's a lot of issues across the United States and in Hawaii specifically. Yeah.
Maybe.
There's a lot of different issues. There's a woman, I believe last year, the year before, her name's Misha. She was pregnant and she was Native Hawaiian, and she was allegedly killed by her spouse, who is part of the military, but her body was never recovered. Her unborn child was never recovered, and she was one of the like many stories of the missing and murder crisis that happens. And I think it's always important to talk about survivors and victims and really talk about their stories, because it's easy to like talk about the statistics, right? But Misha was a person, and she was loved by her family. And unfortunately, they never got closure on that issue, and she and her child have never been recovered.
And he got away with it.
He's been, it was recently, within like the last month or two, I believe he's being prosecuted by the military, like judicial system, to my understanding. But it has been a long time coming, and I think Misha's family is very hopeful to see justice served. But it's still an ongoing process, and so they haven't been able to get the closure that they would like, understandably. So part 3 is looking at VAWA, so the Violence Against Women Act, and how it relates to the missing and murdered. So VAWA, are folks familiar with the Violence Against Women Act? Great, okay, kind of. Okay, we'll do like a brief recap. There's a lot that goes into VAWA, really all-encompassing. It was created in 1994. Prior to 1994, there was this huge, unfortunate situation, to say the least, that people believed domestic disputes were to be dealt with in the home and weren't to involve the police and weren't to involve any law enforcement and legal repercussions. And so the abuse of women was just turned a blind eye to. And so in 1994, VAWA was enacted as kind of a change in the social understanding relating to the abuse of women. And it allowed folks to be prosecuted for these charges and provided protections for women facing abuse. And as it's expanded into multiple different realms. If you have any familiarity with immigration, it's also utilized for U visas, I believe. So battered women and I think children are able to utilize certain aspects of VAWA to immigrate and get away from their abusive spouse. But specifically, what we're looking at is the concept or the part of VAWA that addresses abuse, missing and murdered, and those sort of situations in the native sense. And so as VAWA expanded in 2000, it expanded to include tribal nations and the creation of tribal coalitions. And so specifically, there wasn't anything in VAWA that related to Native tribes prior to 2000. And then in 2000, they were included. However, they did not have their own section within the Act. It was just kind of it wasn't substantive. It was a small inclusion, but it did expand the program or the Act to include Native folks. And so in 2005, we see the creation of Title IX Safety for Indian Women, and this is huge because it carves out a whole section within VAWA specifically addressing safety for Native women, and really like puts it on the page. And then in 2013, we see the creation of special domestic violence criminal jurisdictions and expanded protections for Indian women. Really great, interesting stuff here where I don't know how familiar folks are with federal Indian law, but there are certain jurisdictional issues with prosecuting perpetrators of harm, whether you're on reservation, Indian land, or you're not, or whether the person who is perpetrating the harm is Native or if they're not. And so within VAWA, they created special criminal jurisdiction that there's like a lot of nuances to it, but the ability to prosecute and go after perpetrators of harm in certain circumstances for the protection of Native women. So it was a huge movement forward. And then in 2022, we see a technical amendment that does include the inclusions of Native Hawaiians into VAWA. This got a lot of press, and we're going to talk about it, and the expansion of American Indian and Alaska Native protections. And so the two things that we're going to talk about here are the creation of Title IX Safety for Indian Women and the technical amendment to include Native Hawaiians. And these are two areas of like redress that we're going to discuss and use to the 4 values to overlay and see how effective they are, in their proposed solutions. So in 2000 is the VAWA reauthorization. And so what happened here is we had VAWA 2000 was included, it included an amendment to the definition section. So if you're familiar with acts at all, at the beginning, there's this huge block that just talks about like definitions. This means this, and it's very like, it's all legal stuff, and it's very specific about like what means what. So then when ultimately you're taking it to court and there's things in that manner, you call back to the definitions. And so here we have a definition of the tribal coalitions to include Native Hawaiians, but it was only in the definition section. Substantively, it didn't do anything. The amendment didn't address anything else within the body of VAWA. It didn't talk about Native Hawaiians. It didn't include them in any like conversation throughout the rest of the reauthorization. The substantive part, no discussion about Kanaka. And so what happened is that Native Hawaiians weren't actually included in the Act. It was only in the definition section. So we're just putting them in, and we're saying at the beginning, like, oh, you're included. But when we talk about the meat of it, and we're getting at, like, here's what this Act can actually be used for, no conversation, not an inclusion. And so there was nothing that happened there. And then in VAWA 2022, there was the inclusion of Native Hawaiians. And this in Hawaii specifically got a lot of press. Maisie Hirono is one of our legislators on the federal level, and she's the one who introduced this. And so federal legislators insisted here to include Native Hawaiians in the tribal title, but they received pushback from tribes. And so what happened was that the legislators were like, okay, but Native Hawaiians haven't been included in VAWA. We really need to like include them. We have to like figure out where to place them in this act. But the reason that tribes were like, no, we can't do that, is because the purpose of the Title IX Safety for Indian Women, as we discussed, is that one of the big parts is that criminal jurisdiction, right? Really being able to prosecute perpetrators of harm. And so by including Native Hawaiians in this section, it would essentially erode tribal nations' ability to prosecute these perpetrators of harm. Because when you think about it, and this kind of goes into the legal aspect of it, which is a little bit confusing, and I'm happy to try and like address it more if this isn't clear, but Native Hawaiians are not federally recognized, and so they have a different relationship than most tribes to the federal government. And so there's a special trust relationship that Native Hawaiians have to the federal government versus a government-to-government relationship that other tribes have. And so you're having these two, you're trying to like have mix apples and oranges essentially. And if you're saying, oh, Native Hawaiians who don't have this government-to-government relationship can be included in this criminal jurisdiction, then it leaves room for other entities to come in and say, well, we don't have a government-to-government relationship, so we should be included too, right? We have this jurisdiction. If Native Hawaiians can, then why can't we? And so it's this concept, which I don't love, but it's this concept of slippery slope, right? So if everybody can do it, why can't we do it? And so that's why tribes were like, no, like we don't think that this is gonna fit well. And so what ended up happening after all of this back and forth was that there was this final negotiation to include finding 15 into the title. And so it is basically just a statistic, and it says, Native Hawaiians experience a disproportionately high rate of human trafficking, with 64% of human trafficking victims in the state of Hawaii identifying at least part Native Hawaiian. Important statistic, right? But again, we're getting to the concept of like, substantively, does that do anything? Like, what is going on? How are we like really addressing the problem? Is this redress? Is this a solution? So then, to put it all together, what we talk about in relation to these four values is if we're looking at that 2000 reauthorization of VAWA, and we're looking at it and we're saying, okay, well, they included Native Hawaiians in the definition section. That's a start, right? But is it redress to the missing and murder crisis? And does it, restore cultural integrity? Are we redressing injustices in a significant way? Are we, uplifting the social determinants of health and well-being, or perpetuating the status quo? Are we perpetuating historical conditions imposed by colonizers, or redressing the loss of self-governance, right? Are we looking at all of these things that go back to the history of the problem of missing murder in Hawaii by including Native Hawaiians in this definition section of the 2000 VAWA reauthorization? And I feel that it's like a very straightforward answer, right? It's no, because we're not seeing that there's any substantive inclusion of Native Hawaiians in the VAWA Act. There's no actualization of being able to use anything that addresses missing and murdered in VAWA and apply it to Native Hawaiians in that 2000 reauthorization. And so we say no, using this framework, we're not seeing any of these values being reflected in just like merely including Native Hawaiians in this definition. And then if we skip forward to the 2022 amendment to include Native Hawaiians, right? And we go back to that pushback between tribes and federal legislators saying like, we need to include them. And tribes saying, no, that's actually gonna cause, the erosion of our ability to use criminal jurisdiction. And we can kind of see the backwards effect of this if we apply it to Native tribes, right? And so you're losing your ability of self-governance if you include Native Hawaiians, if you're looking on the aspect of other Native tribes, because you're not able to use that criminal jurisdiction to your benefit anymore. You have the possibility of other entities coming in and taking advantage and exploiting that as a way to kind of erode the ability of tribes and erode the significance of that. And it just really is not within this framework getting at anything that is improving either Native Hawaiians' ability to mitigate and end the missing murder crisis and uplift the cultural integrity, uplift and improve social determinants of health and well-being and self-governance and all of these things. And it's regressing these values and kind of going the opposite direction for other Native tribes. And so then what are the next steps, right? We kind of seem like we're at a roadblock where it's like, okay, so we tried to include Native Hawaiians and Navawa. We tried to address this. And it didn't work. Like, if they're not included, it's still not getting at the issue. So then what is the next step forward? And so something that we're trying to do, and we're trying to get like community input on in Hawaii specifically, is the possibility of creating a separate tribal title within VAWA. So we have Title IX, Safety for Native Women, and looking at having a new title specifically for Native Hawaiians that addresses the needs of Native Hawaiian, Wahine, Mahu folks experiencing the missing and murder crisis, so that it doesn't erode the criminal jurisdiction for other Native tribes, and it does address the issue. And so trying to create an amendment to insert language that specifically addresses Native Hawaiians and their special government, the special trust relationship to the government, and distinguishing between tribes, Native tribes, and Native Hawaiians, and that government-to-government relationship versus the special trust relationship. So being able to have both entities utilize VAWA in a positive way and respecting the distinction and differentiation between the two, so it doesn't cause any erasure or erosion of rights.
You're talking about sovereignty.
Sorry?
You're talking about sovereignty. You're really talking about sovereignty in the Kanaka.
It's talking, yeah.
I mean, that's what you're talking, that's not all those words you just said.
Yeah.
They would look at sovereign, they would already have that government-to-government relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely
Welcome to the state tribe.
It's the whole, there's so many things to it, right? And it's like trying, I think like at least from like being, I guess, going to law school and learning, like taking federal Indian law and then like learning about it in like one specific way and then coming into work and being like, oh, it actually is implicated in all of these other ways, specifically to missing and murder. I'm like, oh wow, there's a lot to like unpack here. And so it's much more
Well, it
intense.
was designed to keep the rest of us from not being able to attain that status.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you ever get to the status where they give you nation-to-nation relationship, you will set a precedent for us.
Mm.
And that's the problem. Federal tribes don't want to set that precedent, because then you have to talk to us that still exist, that are state tribes.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it is in a sense, but also like I want to be cognizant that there's a lot of discussion within the Lokui, so like within Native Hawaiian community about whether or not to attain federal recognition or not. This is a conversation that you folks, if you feel, well, you want to chime in, feel free, because I know that I'm not super ma'a to it.
That's a new fresh.
But it's definitely...
We were trying to say the hell of 100 things or something.
It's definitely like it's an interesting conversation, right? Because we talk about the overthrow of the kingdom, and so if there's this conversation about gaining federal recognition, then it's acquiescing to the United States and accepting, and it like being like, yeah, you're right, like we are a state and we do admit, like, and that is a huge issue in itself because it was illegally overthrown, it's illegally occupied, and so it's a huge dialogue that like scholars, community members, and everyone are consistently having about the pros and cons of federal recognition. And like people have written theses, many papers.
The 20th century Indians that they did all that to us, but the nationals they did the same thing to, so everybody's looking at it.
But that's my paper. I mean, that's my presentation. Yes.
So the conversation about VAWA only is relevant if we don't have a government who is trying to dismantle it.
Yes.
Yep.
Legally,
Yeah. It's my opinion, it's totally a dumpster fire. And there isn't a government specifically trying to target women. What has the conversation been like on this topic in the last few months? Is it considering a state VAWA, which you probably already have in some form? Is it like what if the legal minds are sort of talking about what a next step because also the passage of VAWA, every
The
year has
reauthorization.
been getting harder and harder and harder. So what is like the next pivot?
That's a great question. I think it's like, I've talked to a lot of people about like different things that are going on within the federal government, and it's like, it's so hard because I feel like people are always telling me like it's a wait and see approach. Like we're gonna like wait, like we want to see like what's gonna go on, and like, which is hard for me because I'm always like, let's do something now. Like I want to do something now, and they're like, we have to be strategic. And so I've kind of gotten the response of like, we're gonna like sit and like see what happens. Specifically in Hawaii, I think that we're like not quite sure what to do, at least within our organization. We're still trying to like figure out how to situate ourselves should the federal government like do away with VAWA or like the next reauthorization like not be as inclusive. But I recently talked to one of my mentors and someone that like helped me with this understanding, and she works at the National Indigenous, or she used to work at the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center that it's like does a lot of work with VAWA related to Native women, and she said that she is like, even under Trump in his last, sorry, I said the T word,
Agent Orange.
yeah, you know, that person. But under like the last administration, but his last administration, even under that, VAWA continued to expand for Native women. And so there was an increase of funding. So there's always appropriations that are associated with VAWA to fund like Title IX and things of that nature. And so someone's trying to break in. And so even under his previous administration, we were seeing the expansion of these appropriations and these funds. And so she's under hopefully the correct thought that will continue. It'll stay like similar, and we'll still see VAWA continue to exist in these appropriations, if not expand, but stay at a similar level. But I think that's still something to have within our own conversation. It's like things that I'm trying to talk to other community members outside of Hawaii specifically and see what they're doing and like seeing how they're being strategic, and seeing if there's like some other like state operation that we can kind of model ourselves after in order to continue having these discussions and increase the safety for Kanaka Wahine and Mahu. But yeah, thanks for your question. Great. This is our policy and research team, if anybody was curious. I love them so much. But yeah, I just want to say mahalo to everyone on this page and everyone in this room. I really appreciate getting the opportunity to present on this information. I wrote a paper about it in law school, and it's really kind of, it's very important to me, especially like growing up in Alaska and seeing the crisis there, and then coming to Hawaii and seeing the crisis continue here, and really just like trying to have those conversations and increase the safety for Native folks. It's very important to me. But yeah, mahalo for coming. Let me know if you have any questions.